Imagine lying back as the day fades, your breath settling into a calm rhythm, your eyes heavy, your thoughts loosening their grip on the noise of the present. In that stillness, let me take you across centuries, into a world both real and dreamlike. A path that wound its way across deserts, mountains, and endless plains. It is called the Silk Road, yet it was never a single road, never a single line on a map, but a network of pathways, threads of trade and story and memory that stretched from one edge of the world to the other. Tonight, as you drift into rest, let the whisper of that road carry you, as merchants once carried their goods, as pilgrims once carried their hopes, as travelers once carried their dreams. The Silk Road begins not with a stone laid or a road built, but with a question, with a longing. People looked beyond the horizon and wondered what lay there, what treasures, what strangers, what mysteries. From China's eastern capitals, silk shimmered in the sunlight, so light it floated in the breeze, so fine it seemed touched by something beyond human hands. From Rome and Byzantium, coins of gold and silver glowed, spices scented the air, jewels flashed like frozen starlight, and between them stretched miles upon miles of land, harsh and beautiful, silent and alive, waiting to be crossed. Close your eyes and picture the start of a caravan at dawn. The camels rise slowly, their long necks stretching, their packs creaking. As merchants secure bundles of silk, bolts of cloth, jars of oil, sacks of spices. The air is cool, the sky washed pale with first light. In the stillness, bells tied to camels' necks begin to ring softly, not loud, just enough to mark the beginning of movement. Step by step, the caravan sets out, and with it begins the long rhythm of travel that might last months, even years. This rhythm, slow and steady, is the heartbeat of the Silk Road. As you breathe slowly now, imagine the endless landscapes unfolding. To the east, green fields and rivers. To the west, the endless seas of sand. In between mountains, with their peaks hidden in cloud, each step across them is heavy, but each step is also progress, a thread woven into a tapestry of connection. The Silk Road was not only about goods, it was about voices carried across distance, ideas that flowed like streams, faiths that spread like light, blending, shifting, creating something new each time they moved. Picture yourself sitting beside a campfire at night, the caravan halted after a long day's march. The stars above stretch wider than any ceiling, countless and bright. Merchants from distant lands sit together, eating simple bread, sharing water, speaking in many tongues. Some words are understood, some are not, but laughter rises anyway, and in the firelight, differences blur. This was the secret of the Silk Road, not only the silk, not only the spices, but the human connections woven across distances so vast they seemed endless. The Silk Road was both harsh and generous. Harsh in the deserts where the sun beat mercilessly, where sandstorms rose like walls and swallowed paths. Harsh in the mountains where snow fell thick and avalanches roared. But generous too, in the markets where new fruits were tasted for the first time, where music from foreign lands stirred hearts, where fabrics never seen before delighted the eyes. It was a place where wonder lived alongside danger, where every hardship carried with it the promise of discovery. Now let yourself drift into the rhythm of this story as though you were walking alongside the caravan. Step by step, the sound of hooves in sand, the creak of leather straps, the rustle of fabric, the occasional call of a merchant to his companions. The journey is slow, the horizon always far, but that slowness itself is calming. The Silk Road teaches that distance is not to be rushed, that time itself is part of the passage. As centuries passed, empires rose and fell, yet the road endured. Soldiers marched across it, but so did monks, so did traders, so did wanderers. Buddhism spread along it, carrying statues and sutras. Islam spread along it, carrying prayers and mosques. Christianity, too, traveled in whispers and in voices strong. Along with faith came knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, all carried in the minds of travelers, who crossed mountains and deserts with their thoughts as much as with their goods. The Silk Road was not only about what was carried in sacks and on wagons. It was about what was carried in the heart and mind. A story told in Samarkand might be remembered in Constantinople. A melody sung in Kashgar might be echoed in a market in Venice. A spice tasted in Persia might find its way into kitchens in China. This web of exchange did not belong to one people, one empire, or one age. It belonged to all who walked it, all who rested along its edges, all who dreamed of horizons beyond their own. And so, tonight, as you rest, let yourself be part of that timeless journey. Imagine the road stretching before you, not with urgency, not with fear, but with calm. Each step is soft, each breath slow, each thought lighter than the last. The Silk Road is not a rush. It is a drifting, a floating, a wandering. It is the perfect path for sleep, because it never demands arrival. It only invites continuation. Before we travel further into this journey through time and trade, I invite you gently to support this path we are walking together. If this calm unfolding of history brings you peace, if the soft rhythm of past and present helps you drift into rest, consider softly leaving a like, sharing this with someone who might also need calm, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing so that you may return with us to other forgotten ages and other silent roads. Do this not as a task, but as a quiet gesture, like placing a small stone upon a cairn to mark the way for others who come after. Now, close your eyes, breathe as the caravans breathed, steady and unhurried, and let the Silk Road stretch before you, an endless horizon of time, trade, and story, carrying you gently into sleep. Block 2, the flow of caravans and the whisper of distant horizons. When we allow our minds to drift deeper into the heart of the Silk Road, the journey begins to stretch in both directions like a ribbon of endless earth, a thread connecting not only the merchants and wanderers who dared to cross it, but also the very breadth of cultures that lived worlds apart. Imagine, if you will, a caravan slowly setting out at the break of dawn, the horizon tinted with soft shades of pink and gold, the air still cool from the night, and the quiet sound of hooves pressing into the sandy soil. Each step, each movement, is measured not in haste, but in a rhythm that matches the timeless cadence of the road itself. And as the caravan moves, the echoes of voices blend with the rustling wind, weaving a melody that seems to whisper stories of lands unseen, of markets unknown, of treasures yet to be found. The Silk Road was never a single path, never a line on a map. It was a web, a living pulse stretching across deserts and mountains, across valleys and fertile plains, across kingdoms that rose and fell like waves upon the shore. Merchants carried silks from China, glassware from Rome, spices from India, and precious stones from the far reaches of Central Asia. But beyond the goods themselves, what truly traveled along those roads were ideas, languages, beliefs, and ways of seeing the world. A Buddhist monk might share stories of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree with a caravan guard from Persia, while a craftsman from Samarkand could learn a new technique of dyeing fabric from a passing traveler who had once lived by the Mediterranean Sea. In the vast stillness of deserts, where silence wrapped itself around every grain of sand, caravans became tiny moving specks against an endless backdrop. The camels, often called the ships of the desert, carried not only goods but also the hopes of those who placed their trust in the long, arduous journey. They carried bolts of silk that shimmered like rivers of moonlight, spices that released aromas strong enough to linger for miles, and porcelain so delicate that its whiteness mirrored the snow-caps of distant mountains. Each item, so fragile and so precious, became part of a greater story of exchange, of patience, of resilience against nature's tests. Mountains, too, loomed as guardians of the road. Jagged peaks stood like stone sentinels, their icy crowns glistening under the sun, their ridges forming paths that demanded courage and endurance. Travelers would ascend slowly, breathing heavily in the thin air, their footsteps echoing against the stone cliffs, the sound swallowed quickly by the vast expanse of sky. At night, beneath the constellations, fires flickered weakly, and men told stories of faraway lands to keep the darkness from feeling too absolute. The Silk Road was a place where stars became maps, guiding the lost, reminding them that even in the most silent corners of the earth, the heavens were always speaking. Villages dotted the route like lanterns glowing faintly in the night. Some were no more than clusters of clay huts, where children played in dust that seemed older than memory itself. Others blossomed into thriving cities, buzzing with markets, where voices competed with the clamor of animals and the ringing of metal coins. Samarkand, Kashgar, Changan, Antioch, each name carried the scent of markets filled with goods, the murmur of many tongues, the energy of countless exchanges. Within those spaces, strangers became friends, languages collided into new dialects, and foods blended into dishes that told of journeys longer than any map could measure. To think of the Silk Road is to think of continuity, of the endless flow, of life where nothing ever truly stopped, but only paused long enough to change direction. Caravans did not rush. They moved in steady rhythm, as though their very slowness was a kind of wisdom, reminding us that great exchanges require patience, and that the richest treasures are often not the ones carried in sacks or boxes, but those stored quietly in the heart. To follow the Silk Road, then, is not merely to trace a journey of trade, but to surrender to the slow unfolding of human connection, to the gentle weave of cultures that, like silk threads, find strength and beauty in being bound together. And as you let yourself drift in the cadence of these caravans, as you imagine the plodding steps of camels and the sighing wind that caresses both desert and mountain alike, feel the quiet rhythm soften your own breathing, feel the timelessness of those journeys pull you gently into their embrace. The Silk Road is not only history, it is a lullaby of humanity's persistence, a song of movement and stillness, of distance and nearness, of the endless horizon calling and the traveler always answering. Block 3. The caravans begin there. March, when we imagine the caravans that slowly moved across the Silk Road, it is easy to think only of a few animals and their handlers. Yet the reality was far more vast and far more hypnotic in its steady rhythm. Stretching for hundreds of meters, sometimes even for entire kilometers, were long trains of camels, donkeys, and horses, each carrying bundles of goods tied carefully to their backs, their steps slow and deliberate, their heads swaying gently with the weight of each measured movement. The men guiding them, wrapped in robes of wool or cotton depending on the climate, moved with the same unhurried pace, their voices soft when they called to one another, their songs drifting like low winds, a hum that accompanied the animals, as naturally as the sound of sand shifting beneath their feet. This was no hurried procession. It was a living river of trade, a flowing column of beings, bound together by patience, endurance, and the promise that somewhere, many days or weeks ahead, there would be an oasis, a town, a market where the effort would transform into exchange, profit, and survival. The mornings began in stillness. As the pale light of dawn spread across the horizon, the caravan stirred from its night encampment. Fires that had smouldered low through the cold hours of darkness were revived for tea or thin soup, and the air carried the scent of smoke mixed with the faint sweetness of dates or dried apricots taken from cloth sacks. Animals were loaded again, their burdens checked and rechecked, ropes tightened, straps pulled, bells fastened so that their gentle ringing would guide the procession through dust or mist. The pace began as a crawl, each step pulling the travelers out of the cocoon of night and into the long road of day. And with every hour, the sound of footsteps and the clinking of metal grew into a soft, steady music that lulled even the most anxious heart into calm repetition. Traveling by caravan was not a matter of days, but of months, sometimes of seasons. The merchants understood this slowness as a rhythm of life. To travel meant to yield to the vast distances, to accept that the desert would not be rushed, that the mountains would not be hurried. In one part of the journey, men and animals would bake under a merciless sun, every breath dry, every step heavy. Then, in another part, they would climb through icy passes where the wind stung the skin, and the snow creaked beneath the hooves. The caravan adapted, not by speed, but by resilience. Blankets were wrapped tighter, fires burned longer at night, routes shifted with the seasons, with the advice of those who had gone before, with the whispers of local guides who knew which valleys held water and which ridges led only to peril. And yet, despite the hardships, there was a strange serenity to these movements, because each day resembled the one before. The caravan became a kind of moving village, its routine steady, its rituals repeated until they felt like the beating of a single heart. There were pauses at midday when the sun stood high, shadows nearly vanished, and men gathered in small clusters to eat flatbread or share dried meat. There were evenings when the animals were released from their burdens, and fires flickered again while voices told stories, sang songs, or fell silent beneath the vast, unblinking stars. The children who sometimes traveled with their families would fall asleep to the creaking of saddles, to the murmurs of elders, to the constant low sounds of movement. For them, the Silk Road was not merely a path of trade, but a cradle of sleep, a lullaby written in dust and wind. Consider the patience of a camel, its long eyelashes shading its eyes, its feet broad against the shifting ground, its breath steady even in heat. These animals were not rushed, for they were built for endurance, for hours of walking with little complaint. The caravan leaders trusted them more than anything else, for a camel could smell water from miles away, could endure thirst when men were already weakened, could carry burdens that seemed beyond reason. Their presence was the spine of the caravan, their bodies like ships carrying entire markets across deserts that otherwise would have been seas of silence and emptiness. When one looks at the history of the Silk Road, one must see it not only as a line of trade between empires, but as the echo of animal footsteps, as the music of bells tied to saddles, as the breath of creatures who were silent companions in humanity's exchange of dreams. The days blurred into one another. Sunlight followed moonlight, moonlight yielded to dawn, and dawn stretched into long afternoons. And in this endless repetition, there was something deeply calming. The merchants, though they carried the anxieties of profit and loss, surrendered to the pace of the road. They had no choice but to walk, to rest, to rise, to walk again. And slowly, the rhythm stripped away the sharp edges of thought, softening ambition into patience, turning urgency into acceptance. The Silk Road demanded this surrender, and in return it gave a strange peace, a deep, meditative awareness of each moment. One step, then another, one day, then the next. As the caravan advanced, landscapes changed in quiet transitions. Sand shifted into gravel, gravel into grass, grass into sparse forests. Rivers appeared like veins of silver in the distance, and villages rose with walls of mud, brick or stone, offering markets, inns, or simply the laughter of children chasing each other in the dust. Each place left its mark. A new flavor tasted, a new dialect heard, a new face remembered. The travelers might leave behind silks or glassware, but they carried away scents, songs, and the shape of unfamiliar smiles. The Silk Road was not only the exchange of goods, it was the slow weaving of human encounters, each one a thread in a tapestry stretched across continents. And when night descended, the fires lit once more, and the stars filled the sky, there was a hush that was both fragile and eternal. The caravan lay still, the animals resting, the people wrapped in blankets, but above them stretched the same constellations seen by kings and shepherds alike. It was in these nights that the travelers, far from their homes, felt most connected to everything, the heavens, the earth, the path that carried them onward. And in that stillness, as they drifted towards sleep, the world itself seemed to breathe with them, slow, deep, and endless. Block 4, the merchants of dreams and burdens. To walk along the ancient Silk Road was to step into a river of humanity, where countless individuals carried not only goods balanced upon the backs of animals or tied carefully into bundles of cloth, but also carried within themselves unspoken dreams, desires, and burdens that often weighed heavier than the silks or spices they bartered. In the warm light of early morning, as caravans began to stir from their temporary camps, one might hear the soft jingling of bells tied to the necks of camels, the murmur of men exchanging low words, and the sighing of wind that pressed gently against the canvas of tents. It was in these fragile, half-awake hours that merchants revealed the rhythm of their lives, a rhythm as steady and measured as the endless steps of their animals pressing forward into the horizon. These merchants were not simply men of numbers or coin, though gold glittered in their minds with a constant pull. They were dreamers in their own way, men who looked upon shimmering bolts of silk and saw not merely fabric, but the possibility of opening the gates of far-off cities, of being welcomed by noble families, of securing friendships that stretched across languages and mountains. Some carried incense, whose perfume clung stubbornly to their clothing and hands, reminding them always of temples and sacred rites, even as they trudged through deserts where no temple stood. Others carried spices, their sharp and fragrant notes, seeping through sacks of woven fiber, filling the air around them with the warmth of distant kitchens, with the promise of flavors unknown to strangers who waited patiently in markets thousands of miles away. And yet the burdens were more than physical. Each merchant bore upon his heart the weight of absence, the wife left behind to tend to children, the father whose age would creep forward unobserved, the son whose first words might be spoken before the caravan's long journey ended. In the flickering firelight at night, when laughter faded and only the crackle of wood remained, these men would stare into the shadows and imagine the lives continuing without them, wondering if the path of profit was worth the price of separation. The Silk Road, though fertile in wealth, always demanded sacrifice, and it was these unseen sacrifices that gave the trade its gravity, as if every coin exchanged carried not only value but also a trace of longing, a whisper of loneliness. In the marketplaces where they stopped, merchants became more than simple sellers. They became storytellers, weaving tales into their transactions. A jar of cinnamon from India was never just a jar. It was the sea, the monsoons, the ships that braved them, the hands that dried the bark in the sun, the prayers whispered over harvests. A bolt of silk was not only thread, it was the mulberry leaves eaten by silent worms, the delicate unwinding of cocoons, the patient spinning, and the watchful eyes of women who wove patterns late into the night. Buyers were not only purchasing objects, they were purchasing fragments of entire worlds, condensed and pressed into a single tangible thing. Alongside these dreams came burdens that were invisible to most, but felt keenly by the merchants themselves. There were dangers lurking behind every bend in the road, whispers of bandits who waited in rocky passes, hungry eyes watching for a caravan too lightly guarded. Illness too became a silent companion, a cough that spread through tents, a fever that drained strength from strong bodies. Merchants spoke little of these fears, but at night, when the moon hung cold and silver above, the unease crept close, wrapping around them like the chill of the desert. Still, they pressed onward, because to turn back meant defeat, and to pause meant ruin. The merchants of the Silk Road walked not alone, but in a fragile brotherhood born from necessity. Strangers at first, they became linked by the shared rhythm of footsteps, by the rituals of campfire meals, by the endless conversations that filled the emptiness of distance. Around those fires, burdens softened into stories, and dreams swelled into laughter. A man who once appeared stern revealed a memory of childhood games played near riverbanks. Another confessed his longing to see his homeland's mountains once more. The road stripped them of pretense and pressed them into a kind of companionship that no market could ever measure. And as their journey wound ever onward, through valleys of grass, across deserts of silence, into cities bursting with life, the merchants remained at once heavy and light. Heavy with their cargo, heavy with responsibility, heavy with the unspoken fears they carried like stones hidden in the folds of their garments. Yet light too, buoyed by the knowledge that their steps were part of something larger than themselves, that every exchange, every bargain, every load strapped onto the back of a beast contributed to the slow weaving of a fabric that bound the world together. So the merchants of dreams and burdens moved steadily forward, their shadows stretching long in the setting sun, their animals trudging in quiet obedience, their hearts both weary and hopeful. Each day was much like the one before, and yet every step carried the possibility of transformation, as if the horizon itself promised that beyond the next hill, the next market, the next city, lay a reward greater than any burden they bore. And so they walked, not merely as traders of goods, but as wanderers of destiny, carrying within themselves the silent truth that the Silk Road was not only about silk or spice, but about the fragile, eternal exchange between longing and fulfillment, between sacrifice and reward. And as you let this image rest within your mind, let the thought of their steady footsteps, of the soft jingling of bells, of the firelight fading into silence, cradle you into stillness, as though you too are a traveler among them, drifting gently through time, drifting gently towards sleep. Block 5. The Oases and the Desert's Hidden Heart. To drift deeper into this journey is to let the sands of time carry you into the vast deserts that once seemed to stretch endlessly before the caravans that traced the path of the Silk Road. These were not barren wastelands in the imagination of those who crossed them, but rather living oceans of dunes, where every grain of sand shimmered like a particle of history, whispering stories of merchants, nomads, and wanderers. The desert, though harsh and unyielding to the careless, offered its own kind of beauty, a slow and meditative rhythm that forced every traveler into communion with silence. Imagine yourself lying back within that immensity, the sky above stretching endlessly, filled with stars that seemed brighter than anywhere else on earth, because here, away from cities and villages, the heavens were open, vast, and without interruption. The desert was more than a place of hardship. It was a sanctuary of perspective, a reminder that smallness and insignificance could also bring peace. Yet, scattered across this sea of sand, oases emerged like miracles, places where life gathered in green, where palms swayed gently, and where waters bubbled up from hidden aquifers deep beneath the surface. These oases were more than stopping points, they were lifelines. To a caravan, the sight of palm fronds on the horizon was like seeing a lighthouse after days at sea. Here, wells were drawn, animals were watered, and merchants found shelter to rest weary limbs and rejuvenate spirits. In these enclaves, cultures collided in miniature. Traders from Persia shared stories with those from India, while nomads passed on wisdom of the desert winds and the movements of stars. These encounters were not hurried. They unfolded slowly. Around fires, under the open sky, accompanied by the music of distant flutes or the rhythmic chanting of prayers, whispered in languages from every corner of the continent. As you picture these oases, let your mind soften and slow. Imagine the warm desert wind brushing over your skin, carrying with it the fragrance of date palms and the faint dampness of water hidden beneath sand. The animals' camels swaying rhythmically with their padded steps, horses drinking deeply, donkeys resting under shade were not just beasts of burden, but companions in survival, partners in enduring the desert's trials. The air here seemed to hold time differently. Hours stretched into long, contemplative spans, where the firelight flickered and shadows danced slowly against tent walls. Stories unfolded like silk unrolled from a loom, soft, delicate, but endlessly long. For the desert was not silent, not truly. It hummed with winds, with the shifting of dunes, with the creak of leather straps and the soft, steady padding of camel feet. The merchants knew its voice, respected it, and feared it too. Sandstorms could rise suddenly, cloaking the sky, erasing paths, and testing endurance. But with patience and respect, the desert revealed itself as a teacher, a keeper of secrets, and a reminder that only through stillness could one hear the truths it carried. When the caravan approached a great oasis town, places like Merv, Dunhuang, or Kashgarh, the sense of relief was almost sacred. These were not mere watering holes, but bustling crossroads where cultures mingled in vibrant displays. The bazaars teemed with goods, Chinese silk shimmering in rolls of red and gold, Persian carpets dyed with colors from pomegranate skins and indigo leaves, spices that filled the air with warmth, cinnamon, cardamom, saffron. The sounds of these markets were soft in memory, a murmuring tide of voices blending together in dozens of tongues. yet carried with an energy that reassured travelers that the journey was not only about hardship, but about connection. Resting in such towns, travelers would linger for days, sometimes weeks, for the desert did not allow hurried passage. Camels needed to regain strength, goods needed to be traded, and friendships needed time to root themselves. Pilgrims shared scriptures, storytellers painted pictures with words of lands far away. Artisans displayed crafts that spoke of identities and traditions carried carefully across miles. At night, the glow of lamps lit narrow streets, and the air filled with the gentle rhythm of stringed instruments, while above, the stars still watched with the same eternal patience. There was something eternal in this rhythm, the long stretches of desert silence, the sudden relief of an oasis, the gentle bustle of an oasis town, and then the desert again, endless and vast. This cycle shaped the mental and emotional pace of those who traveled. It cultivated patience, a surrender to the slowness of life, and a deep trust in the balance of scarcity and abundance. And as you let your own breath fall into this rhythm, you too may find yourself surrendering, as the merchants once did, to the serenity that waits within stillness. The Silk Road was not only paved with goods, but with these meditative rhythms of passage. For in the long expanses of sand and the pauses of oasis life, humanity learned the art of listening not only to each other, but to the world itself. So, close your eyes, let the desert sands whisper across your thoughts, and allow the distant sound of an oasis spring bubbling up from stone to calm you further. This is the hidden heart of the Silk Road, not in the goods exchanged, but in the silence and renewal offered by the desert's oases. Block 6, the markets along the Silk Road. Imagine walking slowly into a marketplace that stretches like a labyrinth of sounds, scents, and colors, where every step carries you deeper into the living pulse of the Silk Road. The air is heavy with the fragrance of cinnamon and cloves, carried in sacks that traders carefully measure with bronze weights. Nearby, open baskets overflow with saffron, threads glowing like tiny flames, while bundles of dried herbs dangle above your head, their aromas mixing into a strange and calming harmony. The murmur of voices blends into a low, continuous hum, punctuated by the call of merchants offering bolts of silk that shine in the sunlight like streams of liquid water. Every detail of the market invites you not to rush, but to drift, as though the slow pace of the bazaar mirrors the rhythm of breathing itself. The markets along the Silk Road were not just places of exchange, they were crossroads of humanity, where the lives of shepherds, nobles, pilgrims, and wanderers brushed against one another in fleeting encounters that carried meaning beyond the trade itself. Picture a row of pottery jars, glazed in deep blues and earthy browns, each one shaped by a potter whose name has long been forgotten, yet whose hands live on in the curves of the clay. In the same stall, strings of beads, jade from distant mines, carnelian from India, amber from the shores of the Baltic, catch the light and whisper stories of journeys that have spanned deserts and rivers. The market becomes not a place, but a thread, weaving together worlds that otherwise would never have touched. In this vast, unhurried marketplace, one could hear not only the jingling of coins, but also the subtle accents of many languages. Merchant from Samarkand haggled in Persian, while a trader from Cheyenne responded in Mandarin, and somehow, with the help of gestures, smiles, and shared understanding, a deal would be struck. The languages collided but also harmonized, like different instruments in a single song that rose above the market stalls and floated into the warm air. Each voice added to the sense that here, in this place, the boundaries of kingdoms and empires dissolved, and what remained was a single community of travelers moving through time together. The beauty of the bazaar was not only in the things sold, but in the atmosphere that wrapped itself around every visitor. Imagine carpets unrolled in front of you, each one dense with patterns that twist like vines and blossoms, deep reds and bright golds woven into intricate shapes that hypnotize the eye. You pass your hand across the fibers and feel the softness of wool and the cool strength of silk, both carrying the warmth of those who wove them on looms beside desert fires. These carpets were not merely decorations, they were maps of imagination. Pieces of homeland carried into foreign soil, objects that absorbed the dust of every place they traveled to. And there were sounds too, the plucked notes of a rebab drifting from one corner, the rhythmic clap of a frame drum somewhere else, mingling with the conversations of buyers and sellers. The music was not staged, but emerged naturally, carried in the leisure of those who paused to rest, waiting for travelers to stop and listen. And when you listened, it seemed as though the instruments themselves were singing of distances traveled, of nights under stars, of the loneliness and the joy, of movement across the endless road. The marketplace at the heart of the Silk Road was as much about food as about fabric and gems. Imagine the smell of roasted lamb sizzling on skewers, coated in spices that tingle the senses, next to baskets filled with dried apricots glowing like amber, figs folded in wrinkled sweetness, and pomegranates cut open to reveal a sea of shining seeds. There were walnuts, almonds, pistachios, and honey as thick as gold, poured into small clay bowls. These foods not only filled the body, but carried stories of the land where they were grown. Each bite a memory of orchards, farms, and the fertile soil that sustained distant families. The act of eating in the marketplace was itself a form of travel, as flavors crossed borders just as silk and spice did. The calm of the bazaar lay in its endless repetition. Every morning the stalls were lifted, the goods arranged, the coins exchanged, the songs sung, the meals eaten, the carpets folded. And yet every day was unique, because the faces were always new, the stories fresh, the laughter different. This rhythm created a kind of timelessness, where the line between the ancient and the present blurred. The visitor walking through a market today might hear echoes of voices from centuries past, because the essence of trade is not in the specific goods, but in the act of meeting, of sharing, of pausing together in a place between worlds. If you pause here, in the center of the market, and close your eyes, you can almost feel the current of history passing through you. You hear the shuffle of sandals across stone, the neigh of a horse waiting with packs beside the road, the soft crackle of oil lamps being lit as twilight begins to fall. The colors of the sky deepen, and the market, though slowly folding, still hums with life. The traders do not vanish. They simply retreat into the shadows, ready to begin again the next day, as if they too were part of a larger, eternal rhythm that belonged to the Silk Road itself. To wander through these markets is to wander through the very soul of human exchange. They remind us that beyond the borders of empire and the dust of wars, what endured were these gatherings of people who trusted one another enough to share. Every silk garment carried not only its threads, but also the trust of the buyer and the seller. Every jar of spice contained the quiet courage of those who carried it across deserts. The markets were not only commercial hubs, but sanctuaries of human connection. Gentle places where the world became smaller, and where, for a brief moment, everyone belonged to the same story. And so, drifting through this imagined bazaar of the past, you find yourself slowing your breath, as though inhaling with each spice, exhaling with each sound. The Silk Road becomes not only a line across a map, but a memory of countless meetings that gave life its softness and its color. The market whispers its eternal invitation to step in, to wander without hurry, and to remember that in the exchange of goods lies the exchange of hearts. Block 7 as the Silk Road unrolled like an endless ribbon across deserts, mountains, and plains. The rhythm of the caravans themselves became part of its music. One can almost hear, if one listens slowly enough, the soft padding of camel feet against the dust, the wooden creak of wagon wheels, the muffled voices of merchants counting goods, and the murmur of distant winds dragging fine sand across ancient tracks. The journey was not rushed, never hurried, but stretched into a continuum where time itself seemed to dissolve into the desert air. With every step taken eastward or westward, the travelers felt themselves part of something greater than their own ambitions, part of a current of human exchange flowing across continents, blending cultures, languages, and beliefs into a mosaic that seemed as vast and unending as the horizon they faced each dawn. To drift into this world is to imagine yourself at the heart of the Gobi Desert. The vast emptiness rolls out in all directions, a plain of gold and silver under the morning sun, then a sea of shifting shadows under the moon. The silence is profound, yet never absolute, for there is always the wind, brushing across dunes like the whisper of forgotten centuries. Always the movement of sand grains tapping against one another like beads sliding over invisible strings. Caravans moved here in measured pace, their animals laden with bolts of silk, sacks of spices, bundles of jade, and sometimes scrolls written in calligraphy so delicate they seemed almost to breathe. Every footfall pressed into the sand became part of a memory, a trace of humanity's persistence carved into landscapes that could have swallowed them whole in storms of dust or thirst. The road itself was not a single road, but a series of shifting veins of possibility. One route might lead toward the northern steppes, another toward fertile oases cradled between mountains, and still another skirting rivers where green life clung to the edges of parched lands. In the desert, paths blurred, erased by winds within days, so it was the stars that became the truest compass. Night after night, travelers tilted their faces upward to the same heavens that countless others had watched before them, letting the constellations draw lines across the sky, invisible threads guiding them across the shifting seas of sand. Under these skies, time lengthened, and a man could fall asleep to the slow breathing of camels, the soft crackle of fires, and the infinite stillness between heartbeats. Moving westward, the road wound into Persia, a land of gardens and poets, of domes rising blue against the horizon and marketplaces alive with color. To arrive in one of Persia's cities after the barrenness of desert travel was to feel as though the world itself had bloomed anew. The air carried the scent of roses from cultivated gardens, mingling with saffron and cinnamon drifting from kitchens, while fountains gurgled in courtyards where travelers washed the sand from their bodies and traders opened their chests of treasures. Persian bazaars were themselves living organisms, stalls crowded with textiles dyed in shades that seemed pulled from sunsets. Jewelry crafted with stones carried from as far as India, manuscripts covered in lines of verse that could stir both intellect and spirit. Each encounter added a thread to the vast tapestry, each exchange a story that traveled onward as surely as any caravan. But beyond the bazaars lay the quiet places, the caravanserais that rose like islands across the seas of emptiness. These stone refuges offered walls against the biting winds, water for the thirsty, and rest for the weary. Imagine stepping through their heavy doors at night, the stars blazing above, and finding yourself in a courtyard ringed with stone arches, where fires glowed and stories unfolded. Merchants sat shoulder to shoulder, Persians beside Indians, Arabs beside Chinese, Greeks beside Turks, their tongues weaving together in a chorus of bargaining, laughter, and storytelling. In those nights of mingled voices, cultures rubbed against one another like stones in a river, smoothing differences into understanding, shaping strangers into neighbors even if only for the span of one evening. Beyond Persia, the road stretched further west, spilling into the reaches of Mesopotamia and the Levant, toward the ports of the Mediterranean. Their caravans emptied their treasures into the hands of sailors, who then carried them across waters. Toward Europe, where silks draped kings and queens, where spices changed cuisines forever, and where ideas quiet, subtle, yet potent took root in minds far removed from the deserts that had birthed them. The Silk Road was not merely trade. It was transmission of thought, of art, of science, of faith. A whisper spoken in the markets of Samarkand might ripple through to Venice, in forms altered, but still recognizable, like a melody played on different instruments, yet carrying the same refrain. And always, in the background, was the rhythm of the journey itself, the quiet patience of travelers, the stillness of deserts, the vast openness of skies. The Silk Road was not rushed. It unfolded like a slow song, a lullaby hummed across centuries, carrying not only goods but the breath of civilizations. Each traveler who walked its paths carried within them the memory of all who had come before, just as the sands remembered the touch of their feet. When you close your eyes now and let your thoughts drift into this rhythm, you can almost feel the desert wind cooling your skin, hear the creak of harnesses, smell the spice-laden air of a Persian bazaar, and know, in the gentlest way, that you are moving through history's dream, following an ancient current that still flows, soft and unbroken, beneath the surface of our modern world. Block 8. The meeting of civilizations along the road. When one imagines the Silk Road stretching endlessly across deserts and mountains, it is tempting to think only of merchants guiding camels and caravans, or of silk bolts being exchanged for silver coins. But the true life of the Silk Road lay in the places where these wandering streams of humanity met and mingled, in the oases that shimmered like islands of life between seas of sand, in the caravanserais where weary travelers sat side by side with strangers from distant lands, in the cities whose bazaars overflowed with tongues and gestures, spices and perfumes, stories and songs, each meeting place becoming not only a hub of commerce, but also a crucible of cultural transformation. For the Silk Road was less a road and more a river of civilizations, flowing together, merging and diverging, nourishing one another in subtle and enduring ways that still echo through the corridors of time. In Samarkand, for instance, the domes gleamed with turquoise tiles under the same sun that warmed scrolls of philosophy written in Greek, translated into Arabic, and then carried east to be rendered into Chinese, so that an idea born in Athens could pass through the pens of Persian scholars and then inspire sages in Chang'an. And in the same streets, artisans from India displayed glasswork, while Sogdian traders sold textiles dyed with colors unknown to the Chinese, so that a child, wandering through the bazaar, might see fabrics, hear dialects, and taste sweets that no single kingdom could have produced on its own. In Kashgar, where the Taklamakan desert seemed to swallow the horizon, the markets overflowed with voices from every corner of the known world, Persians bargaining over carpets, Arabs weighing frankincense, Uyghurs carrying felt, Chinese officials tallying trade records, and even the occasional Roman coin appearing like a talisman from another empirish transaction more than commerce. Each an affirmation that humanity, for all its divisions, seeks contact, exchange, and shared meaning. The Silk Road was also a channel for religions, and in its caravan routes the sacred traveled as surely as silk. Buddhist monks from India carried scriptures north into Central Asia, where caves were carved and painted to hold their images. Nestorian Christians carried crosses across deserts and raised them beside shrines to other faiths. Manichaean texts found an audience in faraway lands, and Islam, rising swiftly in the 7th century, spread not only by the sword but by the word, by the merchant's honesty, by the scholar's reasoning, by the traveler's quiet conversation under starry skies with men and women who hungered for purpose. Along this road, temples rose where caravans paused, mosques were built near markets, stupas stood beside walls adorned with frescoes, and in the soundscape of a single city one might hear bells, drums, chants, and the call to prayer, each faith, not annihilating but existing, negotiating, absorbing, and transforming, creating a patchwork of belief that cannot be reduced to one tradition alone. Food to became a traveler, for recipes, like stories, are easily carried in memory, and so noodles from China crossed westward, meeting spices from India, while dried fruits and nuts traveled eastward, and in the kitchens of caravanserais cooks blended what they had with what had arrived, so that one might taste a dish that carried the memory of 3 or 4 homelands. The aroma of cumin from Central Asia mingled with coriander from Persia, rice from the east simmered with lamb from the steppes, and in the act of eating, strangers found themselves part of a shared table, their bodies nourished by the very blending of lands and climates. One could say that the Silk Road was also a kitchen of the world, simmering slowly, producing the recipes of human togetherness. Languages interwove like threads. Persian served as a common tongue, Arabic added rhythm, Turkish gave cadence, Chinese offered precision, Sanskrit brought depth, and through these mixtures new dialects emerged, creoles of the desert, bridge tongues of the oasis, so that even those who could not write could still buy and sell, sing and tell, marry and dream across the boundaries of empire. And through language, humor and poetry flowed, for a merchant might recite a line from Ferdowsi to ease a negotiation. A monk might tell a parable to calm a frightened caravan. A traveler might hum a song that, once heard, could never be forgotten, its melody carrying across dunes and mountains long after the singer had gone. Art, too, bore witness to this blending. In murals of Dunhuang, one finds the profiles of foreign faces painted into sacred scenes. In Persian miniatures, one glimpses dragons and motifs borrowed from China. In Byzantine mosaics, certain colors owe their brilliance to pigments carried across deserts, and in Central Asian sculptures, the curve of a robe may echo both Indian and Greco-Roman forms. Each stroke, each carving, each color was not created in isolation, but in conversation, a visual testimony that beauty itself thrives when civilizations meet. Yet beyond the bazaar, beyond the temple, beyond the kitchen and the canvas, perhaps the most enduring exchange was the sharing of knowledge. Paper, invented in China, traveled west along the Silk Road, carried by merchants and scholars, until it reached the Abbasid Caliphate, where libraries blossomed and manuscripts multiplied, changing forever the way ideas could be stored and spread. The compass, too, made its journey, as did astronomical charts, medicinal herbs, algebraic formulas, and fables of wisdom. A healer in one land could use a root known only in another. A mathematician in Baghdad could solve equations that had roots in India. A European scholar could one day read Aristotle thanks to translations carried east, then west again, like a mirror of thought reflecting light across centuries. The Silk Road, then, was not merely a path of goods, but of minds. A channel where curiosity itself became the most precious cargo. Imagine a single evening at a caravanserai. The fires lit, camels resting, dust settling, the scent of cooked lamb rising, while men and women from 5 different lands sit side by side, their hands gesturing in the half-light, their laughter rising despite language barriers, their stories woven into one tapestry of sound. A child falls asleep against the lap of a stranger, safe in a world that, for one night, feels united. And in the stars above, the constellations look the same to all. Whether they are named Orion or the Hunter, Ursa or the Great Bear, each point of light a common inheritance that no empire can divide. And so the meeting of civilizations along the Silk Road was not an accident, not a mere byproduct of trade, but the very essence of the road itself. It was a living current of humanity, carrying within it the seeds of art, science, faith, food, and friendship. Though empires rose and fell, though wars were fought, though deserts claimed their toll, what endured was this flow, this mingling, this testament that to be human is to connect, to share, to create together. The Silk Road was 1,000 roads, yet it was also one, a road of humanity, paved not with stone but with encounters, each step a reminder that our stories, like our goods, are best when exchanged. Block 9, in the stillness of night, when the desert winds carried only the faint sound of shifting sand, caravans along the Silk Road would sometimes pause their journey to rest under the endless dome of stars. And it is here, in these quiet encampments, that cultures which otherwise would have remained forever apart found a way to speak to one another. Not through conquest or domination, but through gentle exchange, through the language of objects and gestures, through the slow rhythm of hospitality that binds strangers together in a world of uncertainty. And so we must linger in this moment, imagining the glow of firelight dancing against worn textiles, the soft murmur of many tongues creating a melody of unfamiliar yet comforting sounds, as Persians, Indians, Chinese, Arabs, and Greeks sat side by side, sharing bread and dried fruit, tasting for the first time the flavors that would forever reshape their understanding of the world beyond their own borders, and perhaps more importantly, reshaping their understanding of what it meant to be human. For here along the Silk Road, people discovered not only goods, but the richness of perspectives, stories carried from mountains and coasts, myths and legends that traveled as far as silk itself, and in these encounters seeds were planted that would bloom centuries later in the form of ideas, philosophies, and sciences that transformed civilizations far removed from these fireside gatherings. To think of the Silk Road only as trade is to miss the deeper current that ran through it, for the Silk Road was also a corridor of memory, of sacred wisdom, of whispered prayers that crossed deserts as easily as camels carried their loads, and each night beneath the stars the travelers felt themselves to be part of something larger, something vast and eternal, a current that connected human beings not merely through objects but through wonder. The exchange of religion and philosophy was as vital as the exchange of silk and spices. And so we can imagine a Buddhist monk carrying sutras westward toward Central Asia, while a Nestorian Christian preacher spoke of mysteries of faith in towns. where Persian fire temples once burned, and Islamic scholars translated and preserved the wisdom of Greeks and Indians before passing it onward to Europe, allowing the old to be reborn in new tongues, and all of it, every fragment, every syllable, every symbol inked onto parchment or carried in memory, relied on the arteries of the Silk Road to move, to spread, to breathe. This movement of knowledge gave birth to a world where nothing was fixed, where ideas could slip their boundaries and inhabit new forms, where medicine crossed into poetry, where astronomy shaped navigation, where calligraphy carried the rhythm of music, and so the Silk Road became not only the lifeline of goods, but the very bloodstream of human culture. Yet beyond the grand arc of history, there were also the simple human moments, the shared glance between merchants trading without a common tongue, the laughter of children chasing one another around tents, the weary sigh of a camel driver sinking into the sand after a day beneath the merciless sun, and these too are part of the Silk Road, as much as silk and jade and porcelain, for they remind us that history is not made only in palaces or recorded in chronicles, but also whispered into existence in fleeting encounters, in friendships formed at the edge of deserts, in trust built across barriers of language and custom. And so, as we continue our journey along this road, let us remember that every artifact unearthed, every ruined caravanserai, every fragment of manuscript once belonged to living hands, two voices that spoke under the same moon we see today, two faces that looked up at the same constellations still glowing above, and in this recognition, the Silk Road becomes not distant history, but a mirror of our own longing to connect, to understand, to share, a reminder that trade was always less about objects and more about weaving human souls into the great fabric of time. Block 10. As the journey deepened and caravans pressed further westward or eastward, one of the most essential elements that allowed the Silk Road to exist at all became more visible, more palpable, almost woven into the very dust of the route itself. The caravanserai, those fortified resting places scattered like islands of life across the barren seas of desert and steppe, without which no merchant, no pilgrim, no envoy of king or emperor could have hoped to survive the long and perilous distances that stretched between distant cities. These caravanserais were more than shelters. They were sanctuaries of survival, where weary travelers could set down their burdens, where animals could be watered, where fires could be lit without fear of bandits appearing. From the dunes, imagine approaching one of these structures after days of sun that scorched your lips, winds that filled your lungs with sand, nights where the cold cut through even the thickest wool, and then, suddenly, rising before you in the twilight, a massive stone or mud brick fortress with a single heavy gate, a promise that within its walls, for a night or two, you would be safe. The sound of camels' bells would mingle with the creak of carts, the cries of herdsmen urging oxen forward, the chatter of languages from distant lands. And as the gate swung open, you would pass into a courtyard where lanterns flickered against ancient walls, where the smell of stew and fresh bread drifted across the air, where the fatigue of miles would begin to lift from your bones. Inside the caravanserai, merchants from India might sit across from traders out of Byzantium, while Sogdian interpreters moved effortlessly between dialects, weaving speech into a tapestry of meaning. In one corner, a scholar might unroll a manuscript, showing strange diagrams to an eager student from a land he had never seen. In another, musicians plucked strings that carried echoes of both East and West, their notes blending into melodies that no single culture could claim as wholly its own. And always, in the stillness of those walls, There was the sense of being at the heart of something larger than yourself, of being a bead on a string that stretched farther than the eye could ever see, binding people together through the sheer necessity of travel. Caravanserais did not only protect bodies, they preserved ideas, safeguarded fragile goods, and created a rhythm of movement that allowed the Silk Road to pulse steadily for centuries. Without them, the road would have been scattered bones in the sand, but with them, the road became a living artery, pulsing with the lifeblood of humanity's desire to connect. And so, in the dimly lit corners of these caravanserais, as merchants shared tea or whispered secrets about routes, dangers, and opportunities, cultures intermingled in ways that reshaped civilizations far beyond the road itself. The architecture of these structures still whispers of their purpose: thick outer walls to resist raiders, inner chambers to store goods, central courtyards wide enough to gather dozens of beasts and carts, small cells where travelers could sleep side by side, uniting in common vulnerability. The very design reflected a truth about the Silk Road. It was not about isolation, but about the interdependence of all who dared to journey. Even strangers, whose homes lay oceans apart, could feel for a brief night like kin within those walls, because survival demanded it, and survival forged bonds that transcended empire, faith, and tongue. And perhaps it was within these humble shelters, not the grand palaces of kings, where the truest foundations of global exchange were laid. For within them, trust was built, bargains struck, friendships sparked, and sometimes even marriages arranged, blending lineages as seamlessly as goods crossed borders. It is no exaggeration to say that caravanserais were among the most important inventions of the ancient world, not because they created something new, but because they made possible the preservation and continuation of all that was being carried along this fragile artery of trade and time. If one closes the eyes and listens, even now, the echoes of those nights can almost be heard. The soft chewing of camels finally at rest, the muted laughter of guards sharing wine, the sharp crackle of flames as dry wood surrendered to fire, the hushed prayers of a pilgrim murmuring words that had crossed from monastery to desert, from temple to roadside, from mosque to caravan. These sounds blended with the smell of spices leaking from sacks, with the sight of silks unfurled in lamplight, their sheen capturing every shade of crimson and gold, with the taste of salt carried from far seas. To step into a caravanserai was to step into a microcosm of the world itself, a concentrated universe where boundaries dissolved, where every human being carried not only their goods but their entire culture on their backs, and where the meeting of these cultures created sparks that would ignite revolutions of art, science, and faith centuries later. The caravanserai was also a place of stories, for when the gates closed and the fires burned low, voices rose, telling tales of dragons lurking in Central Asian mountains, of emperors whose palaces glittered with jewels beyond imagining, of seas so vast no camel could dream of crossing them, of deserts haunted by spirits who misled travelers. These tales, passed from one mouth to another, shaped the imaginations of those who heard them, embedding themselves in local folklore far from their places of origin. A Persian child might grow up fearing Chinese demons described by his father, while a Chinese youth might hear legends of Greek heroes told by a merchant who had once listened to a Hellenistic bard. In this way, the caravanserais became classrooms of imagination, preserving not just goods but myths, songs, and dreams, and those intangible treasures, though weightless, proved more enduring than silk or spice. And so the Silk Road was not only the highways of dust and stone stretching beneath the sun, but also this network of sanctuaries, the caravanserais, which like the stars above were scattered in intervals, guiding travelers, offering rest, anchoring the endless flow of movement into a rhythm that felt almost eternal. Without them, the road would have fractured under the weight of its dangers. With them, it became a bridge not only across lands, but across souls. They remain, even in ruins, as monuments to the resilience of human connection, reminders that even in the harshest places, humanity builds havens of safety, and within those havens, entire worlds of exchange are born. Block 11, the Silk Road. In its vast sweep across deserts, mountains, and valleys, did not merely serve as a passage for merchants transporting goods. It also became an avenue through which the very essence of cultures passed silently, changing the way entire civilizations saw themselves and others. As caravans moved along its endless stretches of dust and stone, as ships traced coastal waters or cut across inland seas, the invisible cargo they bore, beliefs, stories, philosophies, rituals, proved to be even more enduring than silk, porcelain, or spices. Alongside bales of fabric and jars of oil, there flowed metaphysical currents, subtle yet powerful, that carried with them questions about existence, about morality, about the afterlife, and about the order of the cosmos. In this block, we allow ourselves to drift into that invisible river, listening to how ideas whispered through the corridors of the Silk Road, how they took root in foreign soils, how they blended and reshaped identities. One can imagine, beneath the moonlight of a Central Asian desert, travelers gathered round a fire. The crackle of burning wood mingled with the voices of men who had come from vastly different corners of the world. A Persian scholar recited lines from Zoroastrian texts about the eternal struggle between light and darkness. A Buddhist monk, his robes simple, his face calm, responded with teachings of compassion, the cycle of rebirth, and the search for enlightenment. An Nestorian Christian merchant carried not only bolts of cloth, but scrolls describing the gospel, offering reflections on forgiveness and divine love. A Taoist wanderer spoke quietly of harmony with the unseen flow of the Tao. In these circles of exchange, beneath a blanket of stars that spanned nations and empires, ideas crossed boundaries more effectively than any army, any fleet, or any treaty. In the silence that follows such imagined conversations, we realize how the Silk Road became a quiet yet insistent teacher, showing humanity that truth is never bound by borders, that spiritual hunger drives men and women as surely as material need. From India to China, from the Middle East to the Mediterranean, new understandings of life and faith were carried in the hearts of pilgrims and merchants alike. Buddhism, in particular, found fertile ground as it traveled out of India, spreading along caravan routes into Central Asia and across into China. Along the path, it absorbed influences, adapted its imagery, and in turn transformed the architecture, the art, and the rhythms of meditation in places far from its original cradle. Caves were carved into cliffs, painted with celestial figures, serving both as sanctuaries for monks and as resting places for weary travelers, who found not just physical shelter, but also spiritual comfort. Likewise, Christianity journeyed eastward, carried by merchants and missionaries who followed the roads of commerce, though often overshadowed by larger empires and more dominant faiths. These small communities persisted, planting seeds of devotion in soils where their presence was unexpected. Their songs, their prayers, their stories of sacrifice and hope spread quietly, like faint echoes bouncing from one caravanserai to another. And while some of these communities later faded, absorbed into surrounding cultures, the traces of their presence remained: ancient crosses carved into rock walls, fragments of manuscripts, faint inscriptions left behind as markers of a time when the Silk Road seemed to breathe with prayers from all directions. Philosophy, too, was not left behind. Greek thought, preserved in texts and debated in academies, found its way into the hands of translators in Persia and beyond. Aristotle and Plato, once confined to Mediterranean schools, began to wander east. Their ideas, clothed in Syriac and Arabic words, reshaped by scholars who sought to integrate reason with revelation. The Silk Road, then, became a long corridor of thought where rational inquiry and spiritual devotion walked hand in hand. Ideas about medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and ethics circulated endlessly, and with each translation, with each adaptation, human knowledge expanded. No longer was wisdom the property of a single people that belonged to the road itself, to the mosaic of voices that gave it life. Imagine, for a moment, the silent presence of books being loaded onto a camel's back. Leather scroll cases holding delicate manuscripts swayed with each step of the animal, the words inside traveling across mountains and deserts to reach readers who would never meet their authors, who might not even know their names, but who would nevertheless feel the power of their minds. In these texts, seeds of transformation lay dormant, waiting to bloom in the minds of distant students. Knowledge did not move with noise or spectacle. It advanced softly, as soft as the whisper of wind across the dunes, yet its force was unstoppable. The blending of religions and philosophies along the Silk Road created environments where tolerance, though fragile, often blossomed. Cities like Samarkand or Bukhara became centers of coexistence where mosques stood near monasteries, and where shrines attracted both local devotees and wandering foreigners. While conflict was never absent, the enduring story of the road is one of mingling rather than separation, of synthesis rather than division. In its slow rhythm, we see how humanity, when given the chance to share stories and listen with open hearts, can discover common ground even when languages and gods differ. And so, as night deepens in our journey, we picture the Silk Road not only as a track of trade, but as a luminous thread weaving together the spiritual fabric of the old world. Across the centuries, countless souls found in its vastness an invitation to step beyond their inherited certainties, to listen to voices different from their own, to stretch their imagination toward the infinite. The road, in this sense, becomes a metaphor for the human spirit, restless, searching, never content to remain within the walls of its birthplace, always reaching outward toward mystery, toward transcendence. As we allow ourselves to drift deeper into this contemplation, with the gentle hum of history wrapping us in its embrace, our thoughts quiet, the road continues to stretch before us, not only across maps, but across the inner landscape of wonder. And just as caravans once paused beneath the stars to exchange goods and words, so too we pause, letting the awareness of shared humanity settle softly upon us, like a blanket of night that knows no boundaries. Block 12, the Silk Road, in the late centuries of its flourishing, became less a single road and more a living organism, constantly reshaping itself, stretching across valleys and deserts, moving like a great river of humanity and goods that followed new channels whenever old ones dried. To walk through the imagery of those centuries is to imagine caravans weaving in and out of towns that rose and fell like stars, blinking in and out of sight, each settlement a moment of warmth in the long cool expanse of the earth's lonely spaces. Merchants walked not only with silks and porcelain in their packs, but with stories of distant empires, of emperors who ruled with golden scepters, of nomads who swept down like the wind, of scholars who wrote books so delicate they seemed to capture the breath of the divine. The road itself was never truly one. It was many, splitting and rejoining, vanishing in deserts only to reappear beside rivers, circling mountains like patient hands tracing the edges of stone, then drifting once more toward the horizon. And through this weaving, people themselves were woven, voices mingling like threads in a tapestry that spread from China to the Mediterranean. A tapestry that carried not just goods, but the softer textures of belief, hope, fear, and wonder. By this time, the Silk Road was a path of accumulated memory, and every mile was thick with the echoes of earlier footsteps. To rest beneath a caravanserai arch was to rest in the shade of centuries, to know that countless others had sat upon the same stone, staring into fires that flickered like tiny suns in the night. The aroma of stews, rich with spice, might rise into the air, reminding each weary traveler that flavors traveled faster than even the swiftest horse. Pepper from India, cloves from the islands of the sea, cinnamon carried from southern forests, did not simply feed the body but lulled the mind into dreams of faraway lands. Lands imagined and lands real, all layered together in the fabric of the journey. And yet, with every exchange of goods came the subtler exchange of knowledge, mathematics, and astronomy drifting westward, while faiths like Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity brushed gently against each other, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension, but always leaving behind fragments that would never vanish entirely. The image of the road at this point is less one of a narrow line and more one of a wide, shifting belt of movement that pulsed with the lifeblood of civilizations. To travel along it was not only to sell or to buy, but to become a part of something larger, a stream of humanity in which identities blurred, tongues mixed, and new ideas sprouted like wildflowers along the edges of fields. It is here that we see the Silk Road as not merely geography but philosophia, belief in the possibility of contact, of shared space, of mutual curiosity, of listening to the unfamiliar without immediately retreating into the familiar. Along its stretches, one could be a stranger in the morning and by nightfall feel tethered by invisible threads of hospitality, welcomed into a tent or a home, fed and offered safety. The road's greatest treasure, beyond jade or silk, may well have been this: the recognition that no life exists entirely alone, that every horizon, no matter how distant, is linked to another by the simple act of a human being choosing to walk toward it. Thus, when we lie here in the quiet of night, allowing the rhythm of breath to slow and deepen, we can almost feel the Silk Road continue its murmur beneath us, as if the earth itself remembers the weight of the caravans and the voices of the merchants. Its stones may be buried, its tracks erased by sand and time, but in the memory of humanity it still stretches on, inviting us to close our eyes and imagine, to rest and drift with the thought that the road, once alive with footsteps and wheels, is still alive within the dream of every traveler who has ever longed to see what lies beyond the next horizon. Block 13, the Silk Road. As centuries unrolled and dynasties rose and fell like the ebb and flow of distant tides, began to acquire the tone of legend even while it was still being traveled. Travelers would speak of it not only as a line of passage, but as a realm of its own, a world between worlds, a corridor where identities softened and mingled, where the distinctions between East and West became less sharp and more like shades blending on the horizon at twilight. Imagine as you let your breathing slow and your body sink deeper into stillness, a procession moving steadily along sandy plains where the sky seems to stretch forever. The faintest outline of mountains hovering far off like the promise of rest. The camels move with their eternal patience, hooves pressing into dust that has known the weight of thousands before. And in each step there is the rhythm of a heart that belongs not to an individual but to a journey greater than anyone who undertakes it. As the road lengthened across centuries, towns emerged and withered, their names sometimes preserved in chronicles, sometimes erased by the quiet hand of time, leaving behind only fragments of walls, shards of pottery, faint etchings on stone. Yet the road itself did not mourn these changes. It absorbed them, turning ruins into markers, weaving silence into its endless fabric. Caravans that pass by such remnants might pause briefly, lighting fires in the shelter of crumbling walls, telling stories of those who once lived there, then moving on, the fire extinguished, the smoke curling into the night sky like a prayer, fading into starlight. The Silk Road was not a monument. It was a flow, and flows do not stand still, they move, they adapt, they remember by carrying forward rather than clinging back. To travel the Silk Road in these later times was to live inside a constant twilight of cultures. A man from the Persian plateau might find himself reciting verses to companions from the steppes of Mongolia, while a monk from the Indian subcontinent taught simple chants to merchants who carried amber and silver from the shores of the Baltic. In a single caravanserai, under a single roof, one could hear tongues interlacing like threads of sound Arabic prayers rising before dawn. Chinese poems whispered under the moon, Turkic songs echoing against thick wooden beams. The walls themselves seemed to absorb the polyphony, holding them within stone so that even in silence the echoes remained, humming gently through the air like the vibration of a string long after it has been plucked. And for those who paused to listen deeply, there was always this underlying harmony, that humanity, no matter how varied, always carried in its core a longing for connection, for trade not only of objects but of meaning. The goods themselves, silk soft as water, porcelain gleaming with glaze, spices that perfumed the air before their jars were even opened, were never merely commodities. They were bearers of memory, the condensed essence of landscapes, climates, traditions. A single bolt of silk carried with it the mulberry groves of distant valleys, the patient work of hands feeding silkworms, the gentle boiling of cocoons, the delicate drawing of threads so fine they shimmered in the sun. To purchase such a fabric was not simply to own it, but to carry in one's home the whisper of lands unseen, the patient toil of unknown people. Every jar of spice was a miniature geography, a fragment of a forest or island sealed within clay, ready to release its fragrance and remind its bearer that the world was vast, layered, filled with wonders that no single life could contain. As the centuries matured, empires sought to claim the road, to tax it, to guard it, sometimes to close it. But always the road found a way to continue. For no empire could own a horizon, and the Silk Road was made of horizons, ungraspable, always, receding just beyond reach. The sands of the Taklamakan shifted, swallowing old tracks, yet new tracks appeared as if drawn by invisible hands. Rivers altered their courses, mountains trembled, yet caravans adjusted, choosing detours, finding crossings. The endurance of the Silk Road lay not in its stability, but in its adaptability. It was like a great breath that could not be held down, inhaling new routes, exhaling old ones, yet always alive. And in this endurance lay something deeply soothing, for it revealed a truth, that even when the world changes, when kingdoms collapse and cities fall silent, the essence of movement, of seeking, of reaching out to others does not die. The Silk Road became, in this way, a mirror of human spirit, trestless yet patient, fragile yet enduring, forever searching, forever carrying stories forward. To walk its length was to feel one's own smallness and one's own belonging simultaneously. A paradox that soothed rather than unsettled. For in smallness there was humility, and in belonging there was peace. Now, as we drift further into the flow of night, we can allow this imagery to soften our own inner edges. The Silk Road becomes less a history and more a dreamscape, a wide plain under stars where fires burn low and voices murmur gently. You can almost feel yourself within a caravan, wrapped in layers against the cool air, the scent of spice and leather mingling, the faint ringing of camel bells marking time more slowly than any clock. The road stretches before you, not as a demand to move, but as an invitation to rest in its rhythm. To know that even in stillness you are carried forward by the breath of countless generations who once walked the same horizon. The Silk Road becomes the lullaby of civilizations, its refrain not in words, but in the enduring truth that we are all, in some way, travelers together, woven into the same tapestry of time, watching the stars, waiting for dawn, and finding comfort in the endless road that has no final end. Block 14, the echo of stories. The eternal caravan as the Silk Road stretched on endlessly, winding through mountains, deserts, valleys, and rivers. What endured most was not only the silk or the gold, not only the tea leaves or the porcelain, carefully packed into crates, but the voices that carried tales, the murmur of human experience woven into each stop of the journey. And it is here, at this stage of our calm passage through time, that we close our eyes and imagine the echo of those stories continuing like an eternal caravan, unhurried, unbroken, always moving forward, whispering memories into the fabric of history. And so we allow ourselves to drift deeper into that silence, where trade is not only an exchange of goods, but an exchange of essence, of identity, of 1,000 hidden dreams flowing like rivers from east to west and back again, a circulation that mirrors the rise and fall of breath as we relax and give ourselves to this long horizon of timelessness. And it is here, in this expanded vision, that we may see the merchants as keepers of ancient secrets, carrying not only silk, but recipes for dyes, medicinal herbs wrapped in parchment, fragments of music played on reed flutes, symbols traced on clay tablets that spoke of constellations, and whispered fragments of myths that traveled across continents, changing shape but never losing their essence. Just as a story told at dusk in Samarkand might awaken again at dawn in Constantinople, slightly altered by the accents of the teller, by the cadence of another language, yet always infused with the same pulse of longing, the same quiet desire to remember and be remembered. This slow weaving of stories became as valuable as any fabric, for what is silk if not the softness of memory? What is gold if not the shimmering persistence of words told across campfires, across bazaars, across temples where incense rose like clouds toward unseen heavens? And in this sense, the Silk Road was itself a story, unfolding endlessly, written in dust and wind, carried in the hooves of camels and the footsteps of pilgrims, a narrative that resisted the silence of centuries, so that even now, as we let the rhythm of this meditation cradle us, we hear it still, flowing softly. Picture then, a caravan halting at the edge of a desert night, stars unfolding above in endless constellations, the animals resting, their burdens laid down, and the people gathered in a circle, passing bread, pouring warm tea, telling tales of cities seen and unseen, of seas crossed and storms endured. And in that circle of warmth, lit only by fire, there is a sense that all distances vanish, that every path taken leads to this single shared moment of story and silence, a reminder that what truly binds human beings is not the silk, not the coin, not the treaties signed in palaces, but the recognition in another's eyes that they too have walked the long road of longing. As dawn breaks and the caravan prepares again, stories are packed like invisible cargo, weightless yet eternal, carried within the hearts of travelers, slipping quietly into new lands, transforming villages, inspiring monasteries, guiding explorers, who would one day chart the seas, all of it born from that eternal exchange of voices, of listening and telling, a rhythm as ancient as breath itself. And as you listen now, you too become part of this caravan, part of this endless passage, breathing its rhythm, carrying its memory forward. So let us stretch the horizon one last time. Let us imagine that the Silk Road is not past, not vanished, but still unfolding wherever people meet, wherever words are shared, wherever silence itself is broken by a tale, a song, or a simple gesture of welcome. And let us surrender to that continuity. For as long as there is trade, as long as there are roads, as long as there are stars under which weary travelers rest, there will be stories carried like lanterns through the night, there, glow guiding us all, softly, endlessly, toward rest, toward stillness, toward a place where time itself seems to sleep. Block 15, the closing horizon. And now, as the long journey of the Silk Road softens into silence, as the dust of 1,000 caravans settles into memory, as the voices that once filled the air with bargaining, laughter, prayer, and song drift into the background of time itself, we arrive at the final horizon of our passage together, a horizon not defined by distance but by stillness, where movement fades into calm, and where the story itself becomes a gentle breath in the night. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a quiet valley at dusk, the last colors of the sun dissolving into the faint shimmer of stars, the air heavy with the fragrance of earth and distant fire, the faint tinkling of camel bells fading into silence, leaving only the rhythm of your own breathing, slow and effortless, carrying you deeper into rest. The Silk Road was never only about roads, about trade, about the exchange of silk for gold, of porcelain for silver, of tea for spices. It was about the echo of encounters, the subtle weaving of lives across continents, the way a fragment of music, a healing herb, a carved symbol, or a whispered prayer could travel unseen across mountains and deserts to take root in faraway lands. And even now, as you listen with eyes gently closing, you too become part of this endless weaving, your mind wandering softly like a traveler who has set down their burdens and now drifts into sleep. Every sound, every silence, every pause in this narration becomes another step of the caravan, but no longer heavy, no longer filled with effort, simply flowing with the wind, as if you were carried not by camels nor by ships, but by the current of time itself, floating effortlessly across centuries, across landscapes, until there is nothing left but stillness, the wide stillness of a desert at night, infinite, timeless, embracing you like a vast, protective sky. And in this stillness, stories remain, not as noise, not as clamor, but as soft echoes, like fireflies of memory dancing faintly in the dark. Stories that remind us of resilience, of longing, of wonder, of the eternal human need to connect, to share, to carry meaning from one shore to another. The merchants, the monks, the poets, the healers, each of them left behind a fragment. And those fragments are what cradle us even now, giving us the sense that we are never alone, that someone, somewhere once walked this same road, once gazed at these same stars, once rested with the same longing for peace. As you drift deeper into this horizon, you feel yourself becoming lighter, as if the weight of centuries slips away, as if you are no longer a traveler bound to the earth, but a quiet presence carried on the wind, moving endlessly yet without effort, belonging not to one place, but to the whole expanse of time. The Silk Road fades, the cities fade, the caravans fade, and all that remains is the rhythm of your breathing, the vast silence of the night, the infinite comfort of knowing that rest is here, that sleep is already arriving, slow, inevitable, gentle. And if these whispers of time have soothed you, if the journey of the Silk Road has guided you into calm reflection, if the soft unfolding of this horizon has helped you breathe a little slower, sink a little deeper, then know that you may return to this place whenever you wish, for the road is always here, waiting, timeless, infinite, and we, too, will continue to travel together through other stories, other journeys, other horizons. Before you drift fully into rest, I invite you softly, gently to leave behind a trace of your presence, the way travelers left stones by the roadside or carved their names into hidden walls, to let your voice join this quiet caravan. If you wish, you may like this video, share it with another traveler, leave a comment with your own reflection or thought, and subscribe to this channel so that the journey may continue, so that we may meet again on another horizon, under another sky, in another story whispered slowly into the night. But for now, let all that go. Let the invitation rest gently at the edge of your thoughts, and surrender to the silence, to the calm, to the closing of the eyes. The Silk Road has led us here, to this place of stillness. The caravan rests, the stories sleep, and you, too, may rest now, sinking deeper, breathing softer, drifting into the endless horizon of dreams, carried like a quiet traveler into the night.